Amend the Code of Barry's zoning by amending section 140-10-1-1 to allow commercial large-scale ground-mounted solar, I can't say that word, photovoltaic facilities in residential zones, to delete the requirement the facility be located on a separate lot with its own frontage, and to delete the requirement that the facility be sole use on the lot and the sole use of applicable driveway access. Anybody on the board have anything they want to say about that? Mr. Martin?
No, not right now.
Did we want to read this public comment by that writing? So it's pretty lengthy. I don't know if you want me to read that or leave it on the
You
table.
can read it, I don't know, it's up to you. Is it too long, or?
Well, it's kind of long. If anybody wants to read it, they can.
I'll try. I don't got my reading glasses, but. Hi, Mary Ann. It just occurred to me that I could send written comments.
Just skip that part, you can go
Okay.
right down to me.
Go down to the next paragraph.
Yep.
Last year, the town council and the planning board worked together to write a bylaw defining the limits of industrial solar facilities in Barry, which has passed by the town meeting in June 2016. The bylaws allow rooftop solar everywhere, ground-mounted solar installations for personal farm use, and residential and agricultural land, and large industrial solar facilities on zoned for business, commercial, and industrial use. The bylaw prohibits large industrial solar facilities, and the land is zoned residential. The proposed amendment will remove that restriction, leaving the town vulnerable to any lawsuit every time a permit is denied. Zoning has two main purposes, aesthetic and economic. Zoning provides for orderly development which looks better and protects the property values. Homeowners, having bought the property in areas zoned residential, should be confident that no one can build industrial facilities next door. This happened in several neighborhoods in Barry. The detriment of neighborhoods and homes, to the detriment of neighborhoods and homes. Got two. To remove all restrictions on the industrial solar development benefits a few large landowners and at the expense of their neighbors. Replacing forest land and farmland fields where rows of solar pans have a negative effect on the character of the town. Development all over the U.S. is approaching landowners in rural central Massachusetts, trying to make money at the expense of our beautiful towns. They don't care what happens after they've made their money, nor do they care for the expensive developments and affected neighbors. The business community of Barry should be working to increase the awareness of our town and tourist destination. How will that be possible if beautiful historic town is covered up by industrial solar facilities in place of forest and fields? Let's work together to create a future for Barry, and that will benefit the majority of the residents. The end.
You should say who wrote that.
Google. I don't know. Elizabeth
Right there.
Ellen Martin.
Anything you wanna say about this?
I don't go along with all the restrictions that are put on this. Because I might be in the same boat of putting panels on 48 acres that I own. There's a possibility that I will have a solar farm at my. There's been 4 or 5 different solar companies looking at it. I haven't decided if I'll do it, if I won't do it. But it's, what are you gonna do? It's agricultural land. And we had a law come into town before that said that Barry was a farming community and had a right to farm. But we can't put no signs up because that interferes with a real estate agent selling property if you tell them it's a farm next to the house you're buying. So they eliminated that. So what's the difference? Put solar panels in. Still gonna, are you going to tell the neighbors that you're putting solar panels in here? Is the real estate agent going to tell the Western buyer for a property that there's solar panels around? No, I don't think you will. I'm not for all these regulations 100%. I'm not at the 100%. But there's a lot of it's got to be gone over again with a town lawyer and maybe a lawyer for myself. I don't know. Or the town.
Floyd, you wanna comment on
I mean, I'm curious, I do think that there's always room for improvement. Laws are evolution legally, so I think the initial solar bylaw was a good stopgap. I do think there is room for improvement. I do think there needs to be measures to protect residential areas, whereas if you purchase a home on a 10-acre lot, 5-acre lot, in a residential zone, you expect that to be used residentially. So whether or not it would impact the residential lot, if you can make provisions to protect residential zones but still allow solar on large enough acreage. Like one thing that was mentioned was under 15 acres, and then you would be applicable for solar. If you could maintain setbacks and protect the, the scenic views. One of the other things where this all started was for the agricultural use. The state is pushing an agricultural use program. Agricultural's, continued agricultural use with solar development. There's ways to maintain agricultural activity, keeping the panels up, I think 36 inches for grazing the sheep, raised panels for actual cultivation under the panels. There is certain levels of shading that is actually more applicable to some crops. Like lettuce, kale, any leafy greens do actually do better under shading. So for the agricultural exemption, then I do think there is a legitimate cause for a dual use. But whether or not it's strictly, a corporate interest buying a parcel, leasing a parcel, plunking a solar field down next to a residential lot, I don't know. So I mean, that's kind of my take on this. I do think there's room for improvement, but I think we need to be careful. And I don't see there's no emergency here. This is where we can take our time to thoroughly think through the situation and come up with the best possibility that's amicable to everybody in town. I mean, it's a give and take, so I think that time is on our side, and I don't see why we're rushing. So that's where I stand.
I agree. Well, at this point, I'll open it up to public comment. Anybody like to weigh in on this?
State their name.
What?
Tell them to state their name.
I will. There's Mr. Kukas.
We talk about,
Please,
solar.
please say who you are for everybody.
Andrew
Quantum.
Kukas. I'm Andrew Pukas from Barry, and I live on Old Hardwick Road, and we've lived there for like 75 years. We farmed that for 75 years. And you talk about tourist destination, where these solar panels are gonna be, there's no tourists gonna see them. And you didn't mention anything about the taxes that the town is gonna receive from this. I wanna put like 5 megawatts, and the taxes on that is gonna be $75,000 the town is gonna reap from that. And you know, our taxes keep going up. Oh, that's about it for me right here.
Thank you.
Is there any total taxes that we've received from the existing solar fields? I keep hearing about the taxes that these are gonna bring to town,
Right here.
but since solar fields fall under the tax exemption from the energy
That's
provider,
what I don't understand now.
so that is one thing to consider. There is, a lot of these solar fields could push for the tax exemption, because there's a tax exemption for energy providers. So that's why we have to have host agreements in order to get any taxes out of these fields. So, I mean, that's not a guarantee that we will receive tax revenue. That is a negotiation as far as I'm concerned.
It's not automatic.
Right. There's no guarantee.
State your name, please.
Joe Wood, so basically what I just got out of that was, we'd have another, for lack of a better term, Stetson facility in town, large area of land use, no taxes coming back to the community, correct?
It's quite possible.
That's what you're saying, and I'm just using Stetson as an example.
That's a nonprofit.
What about, small parcels of land, is there a restriction on the size lots that they're allowed to use currently?
I'm not following your
Is it,
question.
well, next to my house on Williamsville Road, there's gonna be 2 or 3 acres for sale, and I can tell you the people that own it, they'd rather make money long-term than just sell it off for a quick hit. So, last thing I want is those trees cut down and walk out my kitchen door and see solar panels.
Are you in a residential neighborhood?
Yeah, but
Well,
it's.
that's what
but-
the bylaws are for.
But if you look at the map, it's undetermined, nobody knows. So technically, when you drive through, there's businesses in the neighborhood. So maybe it's zoned both ways.
That's Christian Hill, right?
Yep.
What's
Mr.
that
Bassett's
zone?
across the street, he's got a
Pretty
business.
sure that's ours.
So-
That's R80, I believe.
Right, but if you go, all the times I've been next doors to determine stuff, it's undetermined. Building department doesn't know,
Seriously?
the folks next doors don't know, it's all undetermined.
It should be on the zoning map. I'm pretty sure the industrial on where Alex Foundry is. Okay.
It's all undetermined. Everything needs to, according to the folks and the powers that be, it all needs to be resurveyed to determine what it's gonna land.
We couldn't make a decision on it if it's undetermined.
That's right.
Anybody else?
Someone,
I'm Dave Petrovic from Grogan Road. I'm a farmer in town. I appreciate the board deliberating deeply over this. I mean, has a lot to bear for a lot of people. But as a farmer, I just wanted to let the board know that agriculture, like a lot of other things, going through a lot of changes. And I'd like to be able to have the option for other income generating opportunities on my land that is not permanent, does not need to be put back into houses, and to do our part to reduce our carbon footprint for energy. So I appreciate the deliberation to try and take everybody's concerns into consideration, but I'd like to have fewer restrictions, or at least more personalized deliberation on each proposed site. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else?
We're supposed to be a
Would you
green,
introduce yourself, please?
Peter Reginas on Walnut Road, and I've got a solar factory there now. And we're supposed to be a green community. Are we supposed to be for solar? We've took money for being a green community. Now, you wanna turn around and say to hang with the green?
Is that a rhetorical question, or?
Yes.
well,
I'm
we
not-
are a green community, we're just trying to keep it out of tight residential areas and out of the sight of tourist people who drive around.
Yes, sir?
Matthew Shorten, Sheldon Road. This young man spoke a lot of my concerns. It does seem like the major concerns have to do with visual aesthetics. People don't wanna see it from their house, tourists don't wanna see it from the street. It seems like the solution to that issue is for you all to designate appropriate setbacks from the street and from boundary lines. There's a lot of people, not just a few people, there's a lot of people in this town with substantial acreage that could put a number of panels. My house is a perfect example. I have just 19 acres, it's not a lot, but I have most of that acreage behind my house, invisible from the street. There would be no problem with tourists or neighbors. It's mostly surrounded by swamp anyway. Excuse me, wetland. But, you know, if the choice is, the region needs more electrical generation, supposedly, they tell us. So if the choices are an oil pipeline, or windmills, or a nuclear plant, or a trash to power plant, I'll take solar, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Sue Morello, Matt is a neighbor of mine, I live on Sheldon Road. I have 70 acres out back, that abut Andy Kukas's property. We're interested in putting in a solar farm that nobody will ever see. Not on Andy's property and not from mine. So, I'd like the opportunity to be able to do that to help the taxes as well.
Hi, Michael Hannon. First of all, I don't even remember any advertisement or seeing an advertisement when you changed the bylaws to put the restrictions on it last year. It was a surprise to me when I found out that you can't do it anymore on residential property. It just seemed like it was something that came and nobody really knew about, and all of a sudden it's a bylaw.
Well, that's not how it happened. But
It's not? Okay, well, then maybe I wasn't paying attention close enough.
It was every
As
week.
far as tax revenue from solar farms, I don't know what the story is with all the solar farms in Barry, but I'm in the solar business, and I know that when solar farms go into other communities, the developer has to sit down with the town and come up with a payment in lieu of taxes. So there is substantial revenue that other towns are getting from solar farms. And if Barry has not done that with the solar developers in Barry, then shame on Barry. Because there was a potential to get a lot of money to offset the taxes in this town. The restriction on residential property, I think, was a knee-jerk reaction brought about by a lot of solar farms that went in Barry. And, you know, I live on Town Farm Road, and I see the solar farm up on Pine Ridge Ski Area. Quite frankly, I don't mind looking at it. I'd rather see that than a nuclear power plant or an oil or a coal-fired plant or something like that. In this day and age, when we're dealing with climate change, we should be doing all we can to come up with sensible zoning to promote renewable energy. This state has not only a Global Warming Solutions Act, which has set goals for emissions of fossil fuels, carbon emissions, over the next 15 years, which we are not going to meet if we don't continue to support solar. We also have a regional greenhouse gas initiative of all New England states that we are supposed to meet goals. We have 2 different things in New England that are promoting decreasing emissions of carbon. A good way to do that is sensible zoning that allows renewable energy, particularly solar, which is non-invasive. It's less invasive than wind turbines. I know a lot of people don't like wind turbines. Solar, if it's placed properly, and so that it's not a nuisance to people, is a sensible way to go. And I see why the bylaw was enacted, because people that were looking across the street at an open field for 20 or 30 or 40 years, and now all of a sudden there's a solar farm, that's gonna be a shock. And they're gonna freak out. And I think that the bylaw that was established last year was a knee-jerk reaction to that, to people complaining about the field going away.
Actually, you actually hit the nail on the head. It was a optical thing that people can't see.
Right.
And that's a knee-jerk reaction,
Right.
but,
But as Matthew said, and the woman next to him, if they're placed in a place where they're out of the way and they're buffered,
right.
but now with
If
this,
they got the
with this
appropriate
restriction,
frontage.
you can't do it. You can't put it on residential property. If you own 100 acres someplace and you could put it out in a place, you're restricted, you can't do it. So I think that, you know, bylaws should be evolving. I think that a lot of the zoning bylaws in this town are restrictive. I mean, not just solar, but I don't wanna get into those, but because we're focusing on the solar, I think that we should probably look at the solar bylaw and improve on it. Right now, it's so restrictive, you can't do anything. How much commercial business and industrial land is there left in Barry? Not much, because I've looked at the map. So you've basically said no solar in Barry.
And that is one of the other discussions, is that the available commercial industrial land is limited.
Right.
And one other action would be to avoid changing the solar bylaw and reevaluate the town zoning. So look at the areas of town where we believe that there should be increased commercial, increased industrial.
Maybe
That would
both,
then
both
allow-
should be done, right? Maybe a convergence
So
of
that
both
is,
of those.
that has been discussed, the limited solar, and, commercial industrial.
Because right now, it's too restrictive. And the state has a law that says that no town or city should be restricting solar unless for good reason, health and safety reasons. And as far as I know, there's no health or safety issue related to a solar panel.
Yeah,
Yet,
correct. It's also was said that solar farms will not affect a person's property value next door because there was no data done on it yet. So that was the push to say, oh, it won't affect your property value, because they didn't know.
well,
But-
has it?
But you cannot tell me if I owned a piece of property and you put a
We have
huge,
data on that?
excuse me, I'm talking. If you put a large solar field next to a residential house, you're gonna sit there and tell me that that will not have an effect on that person's property value?
Well, I know two houses
Do you,
right up
do you have
next-
documentation saying that?
Two houses got built up on Stetson Road next to that big solar farm that sold like that. So if it hasn't
The-
affected property value.
The person who put that solar farm also put those houses in, isn't that correct?
No, he
Yes, it
sold
is.
the
Yes,
land.
he did.
Yes, he did.
He sold the land.
He did not build those houses?
He built the houses, but he sold the land to the solar developer.
And he sold the houses.
He sold the houses, so it's there.
After the,
Yes, ma'am.
Brenda Hilleberg, I have a couple of questions. One is, do we have any data on the existing big farms, solar farms that are already in the town in terms of tax revenue? Are they generating any tax revenue? Oh,
All I have is, this is personal.
But where did that come from?
Mr. Cook is doing,
Yeah, but it doesn't say what database this came from.
yeah,
There's no,
it's not a, I know.
I mean, anybody could have wrote that.
That's one question that,
Yeah.
perhaps we could get some answers to. I would think that there would be some data on that. The other is, I've heard, tourism for Barry as being, one of the issues. Do we have any idea what kind of revenue tourism brings into Barry? I can't imagine that there's much. I mean, I don't know. But again, I think we need to have the economic figures in front of us. So, even if they're just estimates, it would be, helpful to have those two.
You mentioned that, a lot of the other towns are getting host town agreements.
Payment in lieu of taxes.
Payment in lieu of taxes.
So that they don't pay personal property taxes.
Right, because they're not, obliged to pay personal property taxes.
No, they are. They're not exempt from personal property taxes.
They're not
So
through the
they
energy.
negotiate a payment in lieu of those taxes.
I misunderstood. I believe that there was an exemption from energy providers.
For residential and for on-site use of a residential unit,
Okay.
there's no tax on that.
You're not talking about commercial solar fields then?
No.
And you were talking about tourists, summertime, Route 122, Route 32, like Dunkin' Donuts, they're putting a new restaurant right where the old snowmobile place was. There was a lot of people and a lot of people I know that ride motorcycles, and they stop at Dunkin' Donuts and they hang out and they walk around. Then they drive up to the center and they walk around the center and stuff, so we have quite a bit of tourism.
So how much does Dunkin' Donuts?
I
tax
don't know.
the town? I mean, that's what I was.
Well, they
like,
play-
the number of businesses
I know.
within town.
They pay the normal taxes, and I don't know what they are, but I know, like in the summertime, I could see sometimes 10, maybe 15 motorcycles there, and they come up and they go out to like Quabbin Reservoir, and they come back down, and it's like a rest stop almost, but
Right.
with, you know,
But it's the
co-
business is still paying the same amount of tax whether you have the tourists coming through or not. So
right, the
point is-
business pays the tax to the town.
Right, so the point is what is the town making in tax revenue from our businesses, whether it's from our residents or in combination with tourists?
I
We
would,
need to look at other sources of tax revenue, and so there's why I'm asking, has the solar industry been able to produce some tax revenue for our communities? And I would think that that would be a yes, that it's bringing in a lot more. The other alternative is, we're gonna have more housing development. Right on my street, we've got 3 new houses going in. So, and it was all wooded land, and now it's not wooded land.
What
Now we have
street
3
is that?
houses.
South?
I'm on Town Farm Road.
Oh,
So, yeah, I'm not opposed to development, but on the other hand, it becomes, then we need to provide more services, for schools and all these other services. So I think we need to look at it from an economic standpoint in terms of what kind of money we'll generate.
but like that land that you were just talking about, that they open up, I see one house there, and I think they're gonna put a couple more.
Right.
Now, if they put a bunch of solar panels in there, would you be happy with that?
Absolutely. If it's generating, how much tax we're gonna make, taxes are we gonna generate from 5 houses compared to a solar farm?
Real estate tax, excise tax for cars, motorcycles.
But also, 5 houses, typically I see 2 to 3 cars in each home's driveways. So now we've got all these other expenses.
I'm
So
gonna
I think
control
it's
the
an
meeting,
okay?
economic issue that should be looked into. Anyway.
are you two neighbors?
No,
We live together.
Oh, okay. Just curious. Yes, sir.
Matt Shorten again. So if one of the issues is property values, from my study, I understand that having solar panels on my property increases my property value.
Maybe yours.
Yes. And
How about your
so,
neighbor?
well, if the average house, when a real estate broker comes to estimate what it might sell for, if they have an average comparables, right? If the comparables are all up,
My
your
point,
situation might be different.
my point is there is no data on that yet. And that was a selling point of these solar companies when they came in. This will not affect anybody's property value, which is a false statement because they don't know that yet.
What I'm saying is, there is data on the homeowner who has solar on his or her property.
Like a single-family home, okay,
Yes, yes,
they
yes.
put solar on
Right.
their roof, which in,
And, okay, and my second point is, I would encourage, this is a little off topic, but I would encourage the town, because we are paying so much in electrical costs for all our municipal facilities, including the public schools, that in places like across the street or the high school parking lot, that we install solar above the parking lot.
they're looking into that.
Yeah, that would be very revenue positive.
They've implemented something either at the sewer plant or the DPW.
DPW, and I believe we're looking into the sewer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're already doing something along those lines down there. But yeah, even the whole roof of the high school, I mean,
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, the dump. all kinds of places like that. I don't wanna give anybody the false impression I'm not for solar, I am, so, just didn't wanna throw that out there. That's Mr. Moran.
Joseph Moran from Winship Road. He is asking for data. I do have a report data that there was a proposed solar array that was gonna be abutting my house, and my value would go down 69,000. This was a licensed appraiser that came out, did all the research, and my value was going to go down 69,000. And the planning board did, this is the only one on Winship Road that they voted down. And what happened? That solar company sued the town and each member of the board here. So, and I don't know if the way it was written for Mr. Kukis, all those things that were in there didn't seem like, it just seemed like it came from somebody else written up, and it would have totally affected Winship Road situation. And it probably, if all that goes in, it would affect, and they would easily be able to put it in. So his site is probably a good site, don't get me wrong, I'm sure it's in a good spot. But what he's asking, and whoever wrote that, what they're asking is just way too drastic. And the planning board has worked very hard to help residents of the town of Barry, and I just don't think we should rush to have any of this changed so quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kukis?
Getting back to the taxes, I have permission from, I don't know if you know where George Hunt Farm is in Orange. They have 122 and 202, and there's a big solar farm right there. And that solar company pays $20,000 a quarter for taxes to the town of Orange. And if it wasn't for the Hunt Farm, the town of Orange would be in real desperate monetary array.
I'm not being a smart ass about this, believe me. Didn't Mr. Stephen King just produce a movie in that town that made a lot of money? They did, Castle Rock Pictures or something like that, brought in a lot of money. And that, I'm not being a wise guy. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Jim Corjale, School Street. I also work in the solar industry. Clarification, residential solar, majority of what we see on residences is leased. So it does not increase the property value. The homeowner doesn't, their appraisals on their home don't go up because of the solar installation because they don't own those systems. So the town doesn't get increased revenues from those. I think there's some really important issues that are coming up here, but I feel like it's not something we want to rush into changing overnight. I think Floyd brought up some really good points about how can, I understand the plight of farmers, and I really support agricultural development. I mean, I think, unfortunately, we're not California, and we're not going to produce what California produces, but at the same time, we're over-reliant on other parts of the country for our food supply. And it is a rather fragile system, and we need to be thinking long-term, not just in the immediate next 5 years, 10 years, but going out. So how can we, in an intelligent way, utilize land for energy generation without having a negative impact, without taking prime land out of potential production? That would be my concern.
You had something else, Mr. Cooper? Oh, anybody else? Yes, sir.
Glenn Parker. I think the town of Barry's at an impasse. Years ago, we had 2 factories and loads of farms. And as laws got passed, the farms disappeared because now more than ever, the farmers are restricted in everything they do, and everything they buy is wholesale, and everything they buy is retail, everything they sell is wholesale. And it's a backward system. And I don't know of anybody that has farmland that makes money with it. They're all subsidized by the spouse working or Social Security or independently wealthy, but they're not making money farming. And it's a shame, but this open land, anybody that's got a lot of open land is land poor because of taxes and whatnot. And I see it turn into houses, and houses are gonna have kids in them, and kids are gonna go to school, and, you know, that's a zero gain at best. But if solar panels go into this open land, when that trend gets over, they can pull the stakes out, take the panels away, and they've still got this open land. So maybe 20 years from now, when something better comes along, we'll still have the open land, and maybe agriculture would come back and be somewhat profitable, so, you know, family farms could flourish again. But I'd like to see something where it's done on an individual basis, based on the land that people have, and the impact is, you know, visual impact and whatnot. And, you know, sometimes you have to put up a row of arborvitae trees or something, but, you know, it's something's gonna happen with this open land, there's no doubt about it, because it's not gonna be able to afford to keep it.
Sue Mello again. The property that I have that's in the back, was going to be a development. It was all planned. I have all the maps where all the development was going to be. There were gonna be a lot of houses, but the person who owned it, defied the boards and was fined heavily, and the development stopped. They didn't follow through with the development, and it was put up for auction. That's how I got it. So it's developable land, but I would never wanna do that. But I need help to do something with it. And I think, as you said, the case-by-case, idea is a good one.
One of the difficulties of doing a case-by-case basis is it leaves us vulnerable to lawsuits. So what may have worked well in one situation and doesn't in another, how do we justify that in court? So that is why the difficulty of case-by-case. So to try to set up regulations that would, you know, fit the greatest spectrum in the middle. And that's where I think we need to evolve forward, where it seems like, I don't know, if you have a representation of the general town, but if the general town is in favor of less stringent solar and opening up more land to solar, then, I mean, that's where we need to work forward. And I do agree that there's a false notion in rural communities that they're gonna remain rural. And the fields next door, the forest next door will always be field and forest for perpetuity. Which, under economic pressure, there's, you know, generally gonna be some sort of development. It could be, you know, maybe somebody will come through an agricultural idea, maybe it'll be house lots, maybe it'll be solar. I mean, house lots cost the town money. Every house that goes in, through plowing, education, services, we lose money. We make more money on forest and fields than we do on homes. The issue of solar and taxes, I think that's where we need to know. We need to know if it's a host community agreement that we're getting taxes from, they're guaranteed to pay property taxes, or some sort of other agreement. And we need to make sure that we have the information, so then we bargain for these agreements to know that we're getting the greatest deal. We don't want a bunch of, I mean, maybe the reason we have all these solar fields in town is because everybody's like, wow, these people do not know what they're talking about, I got in here for pennies on the dollar. So why do we wanna proceed without having the information? So I mean, that's another consideration. What is the best tax revenue that we could receive from these facilities? So that's why the stringent solar bylaw was passed, so then we could gain ground, we could move forward. But, I mean, yeah, there are a lot of concerns, and hopefully we can, you know, kind of, hear them all and try to move forward properly.
Well said, Floyd.
I'm not sure which solar farm it is, but see, being on one board, we don't necessarily know what others are doing until we either communicate with each other. And I don't want to speak out of turn here, and I don't want to use the wrong terminology, but there was some kind of a pilot program or an in lieu of tax program the town was negotiating with one of these solar farms to get some kind of credits to be able to offset the town's municipal light bill. I know that that's in the works or already is done. Something, I'm not sure which farm it was. It was one of the farms. But there was something done along those lines. We don't have the answers for everything, and, you know, we learn as we go as well. There seems to be a common myth out there that the planning board took it upon themselves to enact these laws in secrecy, which is the furthest thing from the truth. Every single one of our meetings is, its agenda is made public on the town's website. Every public meeting is on the town, also, it's on the town's website, it also gets in the newspaper, like tonight's meeting. Everybody knows about it, everybody's here. The whole process when we were looking at tightening the open bylaw that allowed a lot of companies, Mr. Kelly made reference to, which is correct, these companies come in and they look at a town and they know everything about that town way in advance. That's their business, that's their job. They know how much land this person has, whether it's feasible to put a solar farm, how big of a solar farm, is it near the three-phase wiring, what would it cost to get it in, and so forth. And long before the planning board is ever made notice of any of this, whether it be through the permitting process, they've lined their ducks up with people. And it's just, they go through the formality of the queuing system, which is how they get their tax credits, and that's where a lot of the big money is with these solar farms, just through the federal tax project they have. But we were very open with this. We had our meetings posted. Our minutes are public knowledge of what was going on. We didn't secretly hold any meetings and do anything out of the norm. Nobody came to any of our meetings. Nobody. Until it became a law. And then all of a sudden everybody's like, whoa, what's going on here? So I'm not offended when I hear it said or implied that we didn't notify the public with our meetings, because we did. And I'm very confident with that. On the flip side of that, I'm glad to see everybody here, because it means you're interested. I'm not going to speak for the other members, but it's like anything to do with holding a public office. I'm not doing this for me. I have no iron in the fire in any of this. I'm sorry?
Why are you taking us so far off topic right now?
Excuse me?
I didn't hear him.
It just felt like we were a little off topic, that's all.
You feel I'm off topic?
Yeah.
Anybody else feel that way?
Okay.
Because I'm answering somebody's comments earlier.
Okay.
And who are you, sir?
Neil Thayer.
You live in Barry?
I do live in Barry.
Where in Barry?
Lane Road.
Okay.
It felt like we were headed in one direction, then you just jumped back all the way to the beginning of the meeting. But that's okay. I'm sorry. I was confused.
Okay. I'm just explaining what somebody had mentioned when they spoke about us as a board having meetings that weren't open to the public.
I didn't say that.
You implied that we had meetings that weren't publicized.
I said that I wasn't aware of it. I didn't see any story in the newspaper. Maybe you posted it, a notice in the paper. Those are like these little tiny little blocks of fine print that unless you're looking for a public meeting, you don't even look at that page. So I didn't see any stories in the Barry paper or anything about Barry proposing solar bylaw changes.
I did.
Do you have a computer?
Yeah, I have a computer, but I don't check the planning board's agenda every week because
Actually, you know something? It's every other week, and you go on the computer, Town of Barry, and
I guess I'll have to look more often.
yeah, and you can get planning board, conservation, anything, zoning,
I'll
whatever.
look more often.
And I do it once a week.
Yeah, good idea.
I wasn't done. I'll get to you in a second.
Yeah, I go
Sorry.
Walnut Hill. But it was a bylaw, right? So it was approved by a town meeting, correct?
Yes.
The town, at the annual town meeting, it was voted on, yes.
So, and if your board deals with a proposed change, you are only making recommendations to the town that will go on the warrant of another public town meeting.
Right.
So I think that's about as public as you can be.
Yeah.
That's why this
Absolutely right.
public meeting is tonight. It's the same process, but in reverse, which then will go to it may or may not go to an annual town meeting. That all depends on whether the select board votes to put it on there. We only make a recommendation. They don't have to follow our recommendation. And if it does go on to the warrant, then the townspeople vote on it, just like they voted on putting that bylaw in place. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Mr. Fleming, what is your plan after this meeting? How will you proceed after hearing all these public comments?
Well, the legality part of it is, Mr. Baird, would you care to comment on that, where we go forward with this?
Well, I apologize for not being here at the beginning. I was in another part of the building, finalizing some negotiations between the Barry Felton Field Commission and the Worcester County 4-H Fair, which is going to result in the Worcester County 4-H Fair starting in 2018 being held in Felton Field and for possibly the foreseeable future. Something that several people are very excited about. Has nothing to do with your meeting tonight, but I apologize for not being down. I think Mr. Fleming has already kind of summarized why this meeting was being held. It's because someone wrote up a proposed change to the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw presently does not permit what we call large-scale solar facilities in the residential areas of town. Those are the great big farm, I don't know why they call them a farm. They don't grow anything. But anyway, those are the big solar facilities that you see every once in a while. And someone submitted a request to possibly have that change to allow large-scale solar facilities in the residential area of town. Under Mass General laws, that request or proposal is put in the form of a request to the planning board to hold a hearing. And the planning board's doing what, under the statute, they're required to at the request of the selectmen. And after they've concluded the public hearing, which can be a 1-night, 2-night, 3-night, whatever, to get all the issues aired, they can then take a vote and come to a conclusion as to whether they support the concept, they don't support the concept, they support the concept with some changes, and then that would result in that being circulated back to the selectmen, and then the next step is probably up to the person who submitted that suggested change to either get the appropriate documentation to the selectmen to get it on a future town meeting, or some variation of it. If it's a variation of it and changes what has been proposed right now, the planning board would have to hold another public hearing before that town meeting. So this could not just be a one song dance. It could be that this results in other steps. I am absolutely astounded at how many people have shown up tonight.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Petrick?
Not entirely, but I'll stay tuned.
It's easy.
I asked what was next. Maybe that was to ask the board, or were you gonna make a determination or to put forth it's gonna be an ongoing agenda item, or you're gonna propose a working group or further study? I was just curious.
Well, there was a written proposal by Mr. Kukas on a broad sweeping change to the bylaw that is in place now. I'm not gonna speak for the other members, but I don't agree to that. But there is some wiggle room, so that's what we'll do, we'll wiggle.
So you'll place some stipulations
Yeah.
or ask Mr. Kukas if you would resubmit with some other.
And town
ideas.
council has to weigh in on it, and, any bylaw that gets changed goes to the Attorney General's office, and they have to agree to, or disagree with it. So, we'll,
To put it bluntly or simply or whatever, it's a multi-step process.
That I
This,
understand.
this is only one of the many steps. And if it were that it next is on a town meeting warrant, the town people vote, takes a 2/3 vote, it's not a simple majority. It would then be submitted to the Attorney General's office. And if they have the ability to approve in part or disapprove, and then it comes back, gets posted by the town clerk, and then it's retroactively effective to a prior date.
So when is the next town meeting?
Mr. Kukas is next.
It's on next week.
I understand that this meeting was supposed to be for the public to give input to the board, and they could make some new recommendations to change the bylaws so that we could go forward with solar panels. Not to vote on what I had put, you know. That's gone.
Your letter started this whole thing.
Pardon me?
Your letter started this whole process.
Well, there's no other way we could actually put solar panels on your property.
Right, I'm just acknowledging that's how this started, or we wouldn't be here.
I know, but that was voted down by selectmen and you. This meeting was supposed to.
The process was not
Town
met.
residents give input.
Mr. Kukas, the process, it's all done in a timely fashion. Your proposal and time frame would not work out to get put on. And that's why it's going this way. So it's not dead in the water, we're going through the process the same as we did when we did the bylaw change to begin with. Anybody else?
Yeah, Bob Coswell, West Street. I thought that the ideal residential zoning was at the residential housing. And then the one thing that we're not looking for, living in a residential area, is a solar industrial park in our backyard. And that's what started a lot of this bylaw, was that they were gonna put it in our backyard. Now, in the fields, I could see if nobody's seeing it, okay, but if it's going in somebody's backyard, you know, yeah, I'm all for solar, but not in my backyard. And that's what, like, spurred this whole thing, right? And now everybody is, you know, so I think that's something that we should look at, you know, residential is residential. And that's my comment.
I just got a couple of questions. Is farming still 61A?
It can be, yes.
And
Yeah,
that-
you apply for it.
So that would be, make farmland businesses. I'm assuming a farmer has an 04 number and has to register as a business with somebody, federal government, a town or something.
It's with the state.
With the
But
state, yeah.
zoning for the town is land. A business is what the state classifies. It's not the same as the land, which we determined that.
Yeah, that was brought up before.
Excuse me, I could not hear that.
Would you repeat that louder, Mary Ann?
Just wanted to see where we,
We
okay.
addressed
Yeah,
that
we
already.
had already addressed it. With the state, the commercial agricultural is a category. But with the town of Barry, commercial land, it's zoned that way. R80 is residential. commercial, it's the way it's zoned for the town, right, Jim?
And isn't agricultural residential, what we call
Yes.
it, the agricultural land?
The land is residential. The state, it has a category of it being a business, cause it is a business.
No, that's not right.
Yeah, it is right.
61A and 61B, according to the state, is zoned commercial.
It's not zone commercial.
I read it right off the computer.
I think it's agricultural, isn't it?
It's not the zone,
Yeah, Barry
it's
has
not
no
the zone for the
agricultural
town.
zoning. The town of Barry has no agricultural zoning.
The
And
state
the zoning
does.
map is right there that lists all the zones.
Yeah, it's not
Right
the
below it.
same.
There's no agricultural zoning.
Yeah, but according to the
61A
state,
is,
according to the state, any land in the whole state under 61A or 61B is commercial land, is zoned as commercial land, which overrides Barry.
I don't believe that's true.
The category.
What the state law says is you can't exclude agricultural uses from your residential area.
It's a right to farm,
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of a right to farm, which is another, actually a local code. But the state statute says you can't have a zoning bylaw that excludes agricultural uses. It doesn't make it commercial.
Right.
That's not the basis for it being commercial.
Does that answer your question?
Vaguely.
You like David? You had another question? You said you had two questions?
Yeah, about the taxes, I never heard of anybody having anything that didn't pay taxes to the town or somebody. I was just curious about the solar panels. Is there an interpersonal property tax or something? I know, you know, these hedge fund managers come in and put up these solar panels and they were getting a write-off or something, and now they're not, from what I gather. But they're still putting panels up for the long-term investment. But I'm wondering who's getting the tax money that's paid on these panels? Somebody's getting taxed for it. You know, getting tax money for it.
Are you wanting to answer his question?
Yeah, I'll answer that question because it'll bring a little clarity to the
Come on in.
issue. My name's Clark Fenner, I'm a solar developer, and the way the taxation is handled, the idea of payment in lieu of taxes is something which is used in lieu of property tax payments. And it's something that is done such that if a solar farm was taxed at the normal personal property rate, you'd never get any solar done. It'd be too expensive. So generally what you can count on is roughly about $12,000 to $15,000 per megawatt per year to the town. 1 megawatt takes up about 5 acres nowadays. So if you've got a 5 megawatt, 25 acre site, which now in Massachusetts is gonna be the maximum for the net meter projects that are going in this new program. So you're looking at about for a 5 megawatt site, about $75,000 per year to the town in tax revenue. So, you know, and I've got some statistics on the town that show what the effect of the current bylaw is, and the number of properties actually that qualify in town. There's about 14 sites on that actually qualify in town, and a lot of those don't qualify under the current bylaw because it's not sole use. There's already a building or something else on it, and there's already another road on it. So you have to put in a separate road because you've got to have a dedicated road. So certain things like that, if you're taking a look at just the available vacant land in industrial or limited business commercial use in the town of Barry, there's actually a number of sites that if they did qualify, it would be right on the street and you'd be sitting there staring right at it, even though it's an industrial land. Whereas there are another roughly 350 pieces of property which are greater than 15 acres in size. And you can, in your bylaw, if you wanted to modify it, you could set a minimum parcel size of 20 acres with a minimum setback of 200 feet from the street or 100 feet from the street. under those conditions, you would be able to force it into the areas that are way back, nobody's gonna see it, nobody's gonna care. And thus, and then the other restriction, which is gonna eliminate a lot of properties, is the accessibility to three-phase power. That alone is something that roughly a quarter of a mile per megawatt is about what people are willing to pay to upgrade the power lines to get to it. So you're talking maybe a mile and a half maximum on a large 5 megawatt project. So the concern, I understand Mr. Moore's concern about, nobody wants it in the backyard. And I think that that is something that can be easily handled. One of the confusing things I think in Barry is the fact that you've got multiple types of residential zoning. And R80 is the only one that we're talking about here. But the other R15 and some of the other smaller, residential zones are something that I think in the area, if there was from a zoning perspective, an agricultural zoning category, or you can even set it up as a solar overlay district, where you can actually, if you did the analysis of the town, you could pick the areas in the town where it's restricted to those areas. And that can be determined by town vote also. And, you know, I've seen towns do it many ways. The easiest way, because you've got a bylaw already, is to amend the bylaw such that it meets the requirements of the residents. Meaning keep it out of the neighborhoods, you know, put it back in the areas just through the ideas of setbacks, from property lines, sight lines. There's a lot of ways that you can write that and still give yourself the opportunity to generate the tax revenue in the town, because it is significant. And because you put, you know, 5 different 5 megawatt solar farms in town, that's not many. And you're talking about, you know, $500,000 in revenue. All of a sudden, you're sitting there going, well, that, and there's no requirements for services on that, as compared to residential development. So I think that with a cooperative effort, you can come up with a very good solution to this that meets everybody's concerns. The concerns about nobody wants it in the backyard, we agree with that. You know, nobody wants it to put it next to a cemetery, nobody wants to, you know, put it in areas that aren't appropriate. But Barry in particular and some of the surrounding towns have got a lot of rural land that currently is in 61A. It's not generating any tax revenue for the town. It's not generating enough income for the owners, and so they're trying their best to hang on to it. This gives them a way to generate some revenue for themselves and their families, generates revenue from the town, keeps it out where nobody needs it, where nobody can see it.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer anybody's questions? And that gentleman, so you're aware, is a solar developer
Right, that's what I said.
who was trying to develop a solar farm right behind Mr. Moran's house, just so you know that.
And he's affiliated with the company that did sue the town, that cost the town thousands of dollars too, in attorney's fees.
Okay.
So I would like to just say, using his estimate of $75,000 of tax revenue per solar farm, we have the 2 big solar farms that Dina and Billy put in many years back. Did the town get this money in lieu of taxes when he did that? Do we know what those? It seems weird that we wouldn't know that.
I don't have that answer.
I can partly answer your question.
Okay.
I don't have numbers, but as far as I know, every solar facility that has either already been constructed and is generating, or is in the process, is either paying a personal property tax on the panels and personal equipment, or a pilot payment in lieu of taxes. The other ingredient, which doesn't come to the same level, or it might not come to the same level, all of those properties are also paying real estate tax. The problem with the personal property tax portion is that there is, in our state's wisdom, you know, the geniuses that we send down to Boston, an exemption under certain circumstances for facilities that generate electricity to pay personal property tax on their facilities. And the alternative is to get the person that's constructing this and operating it to agree to the pilot, payment in lieu. They can tell you to go jump in a lake on the pilot, or they can be very nice and agree to it. So there's
Mm-hmm.
not a guarantee of the numbers that everybody likes to throw around of a solar facility generating X number of dollars. It may change.
But don't they have to be approved? I mean, if it's by right, don't they have to still come in and be approved in town?
Through special permit.
That part, yes.
Right,
Yes.
and so couldn't at that time, isn't there, it just, if the other towns are getting this payment in lieu of taxes, I'm just wondering why we don't have a system set up here in Barry.
We do.
That would produce that same
We
outcome.
do, and you voted, if you went to the town meeting, on an article that approved a pilot agreement. And I forget which facility it was for.
I think it was when Dean Anadoli started.
And that was another one.
No, I think
They
it
weren't
might have
doing
been
a pilot
Mr. Aginas.
Initially. Iandoli did not do a pilot initially. He paid personal property tax initially. But at the town meeting this year, you collectively, meaning the town, voted to authorize the selectmen and the assessors, I think it was worded that way, to enter into a payment in lieu of tax agreement for whatever facility that was for, and I can't remember. But it also had an additional portion of that vote that authorized them to also enter into similar payment in lieu of tax agreements with other solar facilities in the town. So the town is able to do that. The steps to get to that are, in some ways, at the option of the facility. They can say, oh, we'll just pay personal property tax. The assessor's office has done a very careful calculation of what that would be, and the numbers range somewhat, but they're in that vicinity of maybe 15, 20,000 for a, I don't know if it's the 5-acre threshold, but somewhere's in that neighborhood.
It's on a per megawatt basis,
Yeah.
so.
The trouble with the personal property tax is that the personal property slowly becomes worth less over time. And the anticipated life expectancy of these facilities, according to somebody's calculations, is 2 years. So you may have a facility that's paying you something, and at the end of that 20 years doesn't have to pay you anything, if they continue to operate that facility. If they upgrade it with new panels and improvements and everything, then you're back into a new ballgame with new numbers, new facility calculations and everything. So the assessors are doing a very aggressive job. Actually, I think the Barry assessors were the first to come up with a very comprehensive calculation for the personal property tax for a solar facility. And it was borrowed by the DOR and other towns because it was so good. So there are people watching out from the standpoint of funds to the town, but the other side of the coin is, and that's where the planning board comes in, they're looking out for the ability of people to do what they would like to on their property and not do what ticks off the neighbor. That's to put it as simply as possible what zoning's all about. So the planning board tries to do what they can to the extent, reasonable, to allow people to do things on their properties. And that's where the zoning bylaw tries to anticipate all these possible things that people might want to do on their property. And at the same time tries to protect, in drawing up the bylaw, the people that are gonna live next to whatever this thing is that they're gonna wanna do on their property. So the assessors will be the ones that would be appropriate to worry about the tax revenue, pilot, personal property, real estate property, taxes, those things. That's not an issue really for the planning board. That's for the assessors.
I just wondered if these folks can parlay approval for your project for the agreement, if you, when you talk cluster zoning, you have we have examples of planning boards that make a deal with the developer that if they approve of it, they'll provide a connection to the local trail, or they'll provide so much open space, or they'll provide other amenities that benefit everybody. And that's part of the wheeling and dealing that you folks do many times.
Horse trading.
What's that?
Horse trading.
Horse trading, exactly. I didn't know whether you can horse trade on this pilot.
I think it's in the bylaw. I'm pretty sure it's in the bylaw. Right now, I think, and I'm saying I'm pretty sure it's in the bylaw. The bylaw requires that if the owner of the property wants to take and put a solar facility on the property, he has to take it out of 61A if he had it in 61A. That means he's no longer eligible for a reduced real estate tax. So from that standpoint, they don't get the bargain real estate tax anymore. They have to pay something more appropriate. And that isn't a lot of money, but it's some money. And it depends on how much land they take out of 61A. As to the other portion of it, the personal property issue, and whether it's gonna be a pilot or a personal property, that's really not within the planning boards. They can suggest it, they could say, would you consider, you know, but that's not something that we could, I don't think we could put it in our bylaw. But they have to do either payment of personal property or a pilot.
Could you explain what you mean by pilot?
Payment in lieu of taxes. The
Okay.
personal property
Yeah.
tax is the one that's, as far as solar facilities.
Okay, I just wasn't familiar with the acronym.
You can use a pilot plan
Yeah.
on even
Wants to
real
ask
estate
questions.
taxes. And that's done
No problem.
in certain
No,
circumstances.
I'll do it, you
too.
want me to do it.
Doug. Yeah, okay.
Sam?
Am I hearing from the chairman or?
Chairman designate. Vice Chairman.
Oh, I see, okay. I was just wondering, can a solar facility come in, pay personal property tax, and then several years down the road, apply for the exemption that Attorney Beard mentioned a moment ago, so that ultimately the town receives zero?
I don't know the answer to that, Jim. You wanna weigh in on
The
that?
answer is it's possible.
Anybody else?
In other words, you're saying, could someone decide to screw the town?
Yeah.
Okay. Aren't they trying to do that all the time?
Well, it's up to the planning board or the other boards to make sure that this doesn't occur. So maybe this provision should be, this exemption provision should not be allowed in town of Barry.
It's a state situation, not a local. Like, we didn't invent the exemption. It's in the state tax statutes, not something that's local. But, and I don't think it takes too much to think about this. As we get close to the end of the year, somewheres in the next couple of months, we're all gonna be doing our own personal property tax, our own personal tax returns. And I think every one of us will be trying to take advantage of each and every exemption or deduction or any way to reduce the amount that we end up paying the federal and the state government. That's just the way it works. And the more of those deductions and exemptions that are eliminated, the better off we are, maybe. Because it then becomes a simple situation where the guy that doesn't have the time to think of the exemptions and deductions is on an equal playing field with the guy that did.
So in essence, what this young lady was mentioning earlier
that someone needs to calculate how much revenue the town will be receiving, that's not necessarily accurate, because theoretically, they could apply for the exemption and the town would receive zero.
Or they could, until either they elect to try to enter into a pilot, which would be what the assessors would be trying to do, the selectmen would be trying to do, and all the, you know, all the, it wouldn't be just something that flew under the radar and was ignored. I mean, it would be well-known, the assessors would know first, and then from there on, the suggestion would be made very strongly that maybe they ought to enter into a pilot if they don't want to pay the personal property.
Yes, ma'am.
Rose Sable, I live on Vernon Ave. So I got a couple questions and then a couple statements. So just for clarity on this zoning change, first of all, I do want to say, when we first started, we didn't have any bylaws and we were inundated with everybody coming here because we were a target for an easy score. I really appreciate the work that was put in for that robust bylaw. It is, I think it's a good job. It needs to be fixed, maybe modified, but I'm grateful that you did put that in and put the brakes on some things. So going back to the zoning that we're talking about tonight, if I understand it right, what's to be done is in your bylaw that you made, it's not gonna be on commercial, these large arrays, it's not gonna be wanted to be on commercial or industrial anymore. They're gonna wanna put it on, they're gonna change it so it goes on residential, which is R80 and all those, correct? Is that one correct statement? Then there's two other things that seem a little hokey to me. Because then it also says, if you do that, we also wanna change the law so that it's not one parcel of land and one business. Is that correct? That they want to change it so that it can be more than one business on there. So that's correct. And then there's a third one, which I might not have a good understanding of. I don't understand what frontage is, like what does that mean?
In other words, a road, which is frontage.
Okay,
A public
so
road.
access is frontage?
Public road, the length, the minimum distance from point A to point B on your abutting property is what is determined as your road frontage in order to build. There's a set standard for it. And that all is determined by what zone you're in. What's the average for an 80, 200 feet? 200, you have to have 200 feet of frontage in order to build on it.
Okay, and thank you for explaining that. So what they're saying is, what they also want to do is remove that part too, right? They don't want you to have frontage. So, we have a setup where you're gonna put these in industrial, I understand, by the way, by farmers or people that have large amounts of land, that they wanna be able to do some things, I understand that. But I do not agree with this blanket change to residential. I think that there's another way to go around this, or whether it's rezoning areas, or having stipulations, like you had a lot of ideas that you brought up, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Floyd Kelly.
Floyd, I really appreciated that, because there's a balance, there's gotta be a balance for everybody. I do have a problem when we're talking about taxes and you have somebody that's selling stuff that isn't necessarily anything to do with the benefit of the town. I have a problem with that. What I'm talking about though is, we need to, I'm a little emotional right now because I do not, that bothers me.
Take a breath.
I know, so I want to explain some things. I live on Vernon Ave, so the property, the first solar farm that came in, I'm not trying to get off topic, I'm trying to explain something here. First solar farm that came in, 62 acres industrial, that's all it's gonna be. Then a rock crusher got put on there. Now they're gonna wanna put a marijuana dispensary on there. And it's supposed to be one business, one parcel of land, okay? Now we're crossing over, not doing what we're supposed to, even in the industrial zone. If you start messing, my house, I bought because I live in a residential area. Now I have all this happy stuff coming by me. When you speak of taxes that we get, it's words, because we didn't make anything on Barry 1 and Barry 2. We didn't negotiate anything. We're not making like this crusher money he's talking about. How many solar farms do we have here? I know my property taxes only go up. So if we're getting all this money that's coming in supposedly, that's really not what's happening. I'm concerned, even like you say that we negotiate things, this marijuana facility that's going up there, opportunity for the town to make money if we have to have it, right? I showed all kinds of plans where you could have a graduated, increased, percentage. So like say you start out at 3%, then you work up to 5%, and then in 5 years, 7% of the gross. Do you know what got negotiated? 1%. And it's a nonprofit. We're not making, people are coming here as business people, smart business people, because they are going to make more money. It's not about the people of the town. That concerns me. And when somebody comes in and all of a sudden, it's not just talking about one thing with the residential. It's got 3 things that are very significant, and that's saying to me, if somebody wants to come in with money and wants to buy 2 residential houses by me, they're gonna buy it, and Pennsylvania's gonna put in a solar farm right next to my house. I'm not in for that. I'm not in for that at all. I think that this is something that we really need to sit back as a community, take care of the people that do have the larger amounts of land, and accommodate that, but changing these residential bylaws is something that I think is very detrimental, and I'm absolutely against.
Thank you.
Just to give some perspective, and I don't know how many you've read the solar bylaws, but I mean, a couple things that'd be pertinent with the, for large-scale ground-mounted facilities, minimum lot size of 80,000 square feet. An acre is 42,000 square feet, so we're talking about 2 acres. That's the minimum required to put one of these facilities in. These zoning bylaws were written for commercial and industrial, which in commercial and industrial you would expect a greater density to provide the best use of land for commercial use. So you remove the commercial industrial and you insert residential into these zoning bylaws that were intended for commercial industrial. I don't believe that you're, that these laws would pertain to that, protect residential. Right, so we get 80,000 square feet, minimum 2 acres. Now for the setbacks, the setbacks on all facilities shall have a front, side, and rear setback of at least 50 feet. For any fence that is required by the planning board, fencing shall be required to fully enclose the project. Solar arrays and related equipment shall have front, side, and rear setbacks, minimum of 100 feet. In the event of a front, side, or rear lot line abuts 1 or more residents, that front or rear side setback shall be a minimum of 200 feet. Setbacks from a roadway shall be 200 feet. A 50-foot minimum setback shall be used when abutting parcels has the same owner and the same proposed use. They can say we can do lesser setbacks. So these are, again, written specifically for commercial industrial zones. Now we want to insert residential. So you would have a 50-foot side setback from your yard to the neighbor's 2-acre commercial solar array. Now that's where I think that some of the reason for the single road use is it's limited use. You develop the solar facility. Why have a separate road that's going to be used twice a year for maintenance? I can understand removing some of those. The setback, if you have a narrow lot that can't be otherwise developed, used agriculturally, some agricultural land, they've sold off all development rights and they've left a right of way for them to access their land. So now they don't have the 200 feet. So I can understand some of the proposed amendments. But to allow these proposed amendments to go into a zoning bylaw that was written specifically for commercial industrial use, we need to go through the entire zoning bylaws and redevelop them for these residential applications. We can't just drop them into a commercial industrial zoning bylaw. And that's my concern, that will allow these changes which make sense under the perfect situation, but they don't make sense on a 2-acre residential lot that somebody wants to plunk a solar field behind their house. So that's why I think, time is on our side. There's no emergency. Why rush to amend, zoning bylaws that aren't fully thought out?
Yes, sir.
I believe that this has probably been mentioned early on and several times since the hearing started. The reason for the hearing is because of the proposed change to the zoning bylaw that would have done the 3, if I can narrow it down to 3 things. 1, allow large-scale solar facilities in the residential zones. 2, eliminate the requirement that it be a separate lot, or qualify as a separate lot, and 3, that it was required to have its own access. That proposal in itself can result in a determination one way or the other by the planning board. However, being a little bit realistic and having seen and heard a lot of the conversation so far, I believe there's been some suggestions and observations about things that could be done to the zoning bylaw that might permit in some very, I hate to use the word select, but in some, and I guess the word rare would not be good either, but in few instances in the residential area to permit solar facilities if they qualified with certain really limited conditions. Those suggestions are great to bring out here, but that's not what the planning board is going to be making a determination on. Those suggestions would be appropriate, and I believe from a prior meeting that the planning board is agreeable to considering some of those and having that as a discussion at a future planning board meeting, and maybe not in the same restrictions and everything as a public hearing imposes. In other words, I think the planning board's willing to hear and listen and discuss some of these things that maybe if we did this, we could allow but that's not the reason for this hearing. This hearing is because of the very limited and rather draconian proposal that was brought before the selectmen that then was shifted to the planning board to hold a public hearing. So probably the planning board would welcome a lot of input from all of you if it was brought forward without it being in the form of a proposed zoning change, but rather in the form of, could we discuss these changes without it being required to have it as a public hearing, if that makes sense.
It certainly does.
Dennis, I got
Yes, sir.
some things to add. There's been a lot of discussion this evening about solar development, and I've heard a few things that I didn't agree with, and I'd like to address those. When this first began, Barry was inundated with applications for solar facilities. We didn't have a strong solar bylaw. So the planning board, this was even before I was a member of the planning board, they did the best they could. We've got solar facilities in places where they should not be. We've heard from a representative of the solar industry that said nobody wants it in their backyard. Well, that's easy to do. Well, that's not the case. That's actually very hard to do. And the reason we changed this bylaw is because of citizens complaining to the Board of Selectmen and to the planning board and to anybody else that would stand still and listen. They were very, very upset about these facilities and where they were going in. That was the impetus to change the bylaw and to put the restriction on it that we weren't going to allow it in residential areas. Now, we made that change. There were several public hearings that were poorly attended. They were advertised. I've heard what we did described as a knee-jerk reaction. That was not the case. It was very careful consideration of what people were saying and where these things were going and what made sense from a controlling where they went standpoint, and we did the best we could. Now, I think there are instances where we could allow facilities in areas where it wouldn't be seen from a road, it wouldn't be seen by a neighbor. We've inspected a couple of places in town where people have expressed an interest, and there's some large tracts of land where solar facility can be located in the interior of it, and no one's gonna know it's there. And I think in those cases it makes sense to figure out what we could do to revise these bylaws, change them to allow that. But the art in it is not to just throw the door open and say, okay, we can do it anywhere. That's not what I think most of the citizens in Barry want, or at least that's the impression I've got. Now, and remember, when we change this, it's not just the planning board saying, well, this is what our ideas are. We do hold a public hearing, and we listen to what people have to say. Then we make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen and a proposed change. That goes to the town meeting and it gets voted on. If people don't like it, they can vote it down, and it doesn't become law. So it's kind of a long process, but there's a lot of input along the way in that process. And you know, it's a balancing act, the greater good for the greatest number. A lot of people move to Barry because it's rural. It has farmland, and that's part of the charm of the town. And a lot of people don't want to see all that farmland covered with solar facilities. And remember, the special permit's for 20 years. And that's a provision, it can be renewed. Now, solar technology is changing very rapidly. My guess is within 20 years, probably before that, they're going to be different panels, probably more efficient panels. And so at the end of 20 years, it's a very high probability they'll come back and say, I want another permit. I want to take out these panels and put in these other panels. So you're going to live with these things for a minimum of 20 years. You may live with them for 40 years. Maybe past the lifetime of a lot of us in here. And you may live with it past that time because you've got a large infrastructure in with footings and support structures and electrical panels and converters and transformers and all of that stuff. That's still going to be there, and that's still worth a lot of money. So you've got to look at this and say, when you put one of these in, it's probably going to be there for a long time. So we need to think about that as well. Because we need to think about, what do we want Barry to look like in 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years? Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to close the public meeting.
You got one more.
Yes, sir. Come on in. Your name?
Charles Carpenter, Winship Road. I moved to Barry about a year ago, so I still consider myself a bit of an outsider. I know my neighbors, but
You'll be an outsider till 3 generations.
And I'll say, as an outsider, when I contemplated moving to Barry, it was very much the rural character, the farmland. I had no idea. Again, I'm living proof of someone who has to have a first impression before they buy property in a rural town. I had no idea that I might be faced with having to stare at an industrial solar farm for the next 40 years of my life. Having said that, I am very much in favor of solar. I have actually been looking at the old catalogs and whatnot from the 70s. I've been sort of tracing the technology. I have a degree in physics, so I'm inherently interested in the technology. I'm very much in favor of being on people's rooftops because it's small and it has an obvious purpose and it's unobtrusive. But I think we have to be very careful when we're looking at putting solar farms, large industrial solar farms, in residential areas. And the word residential was very much on my mind when I bought that piece of property. And I had no association with it being tied to an issue with the solar farm viewshed problem. I think we can see tonight that by the interest of this meeting, that there are lots of different views about this. And so I don't think we want to just shut the door. I think in the case of Mr. Koukas, there might be a very, very compelling reason why solar farms should be on your property. I go by your property almost daily. And
could I interject? Last time I was at one of these meetings, I mentioned that we're the second generations on that farm. My son's work with me is the third, and they've got 2 little kids in the 4th, and we don't want to lose that. And I like to have a mile and a half of road frontage on my land.
Right. Well, as I said, I go by your property almost daily, and from what I can see, I've not looked at the research like, wetlands issues or anything else, but from what I can tell, it looks very much like solar farming could be very much an appropriate business for you on your property. I think you have like 200 acres or so. And if it's placed, you know, unobtrusively, there's no residential houses staring it right out at it. So it's, what I think that does is points to a sort of a fundamental problem we have with the bylaws now, which is we've got these opposing interests, and a good bylaw should ideally address them all, so everyone feels good with the bylaw. So my concern really is not that we just dismiss Mr. Kukas's proposal, but we don't rush headlong and just approve it willy-nilly, especially after a year plus went by with a lot of apparently good work by the town to try to come up with a bylaw, and rush it through. But I do think this is a process that should start tonight, and we should, you know, very carefully, with multiple meetings, try to amend the current bylaw in such a way that Mr. Kukas can have his solar farm and I can have my nice residential rural view shed.
Now I'll entertain a motion to close the meeting.
Motion to
Second?
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the board, it was a very interesting meeting.
Thank you.